Hello, everybody. This is Arthur,
And Daniel.
and here's our econ review session for the test on Monday. So, Daniel, the
No,
first
you
question.
do number one.
Okay, so for number one, we can see that it's asking if we cut taxes on suppliers, so producers, what's the effect going to be? So if we cut taxes on producers, it's going to increase investment spending because investments are what companies, the producers, put into the economy. It's not going to be consumer spending because that would be the consumers. It's not going to be the other two as well, so it's going to be C.
Moving on to number two, the human consequences of the Great Depression included all of the following conditions. So that's going to be very clearly the answer there. That's just historical knowledge.
And human consequences are just going to be the effects of the other than economics. So if we go into three, in contrast to changes in consumer spending, tax changes are going to
spending.
affect, in contrast to government spending, tax changes are going to affect spending indirectly. Because if we look at the equation for GDP, which Dan, do you want to write it? GDP is based off of expenditures. So changing taxes doesn't actually increase expenditures. It's going to indirectly increase them because it's going to allow people to have more money to spend and therefore increase the expenditures in that way. But tax cuts do not directly change spending.
Okay. Moving on to number four. Firms often seek to borrow money to expand their capital stocks, and price they pay for money is the interest rate. What happens when the quantity of money supplied if the interest rate increases? So this is asking if the interest rate increases given the quantity of money supplied. So you might be inclined to say that overall money in the economy is going to decrease because less people are going to want to have or take out loans because of higher interest rates. But if we actually look at the graph and we say interest rates versus, the money quantity, actually we're going to see money supplied be increasing.
And that's simple law of supply and demand. The money supply follows that same law. So if we have interest rates just replace prices in that supply and demand relationship. So it's a positive increase as well.
Moving on to number five. Imports are a leakage in a sense that we're actually going to say that imports in the business cycle, which very roughly talks about the interaction between firms and homes and how the circular flow of money proceeds, will actually say that imports are going to be leakages because now people are buying from an international economy out over here, and so money is being moved out of the economy. So that's why imports are going to be a leakage in the first place. And that's why the answer to this question is going to be B.
Think of the national economy as a system. Imports are a leakage because money is leaving that system to go to foreign places. That's what a leakage is.
The U.S. experience with tax cuts and tax increases since 1975 suggests that overall this is just a historical knowledge question, and we're just going to say that temporary tax changes are less effective than permanent changes.
And that's because permanent changes are going to be in the long run, and therefore a permanent change in taxes is going to permanently change people, consumers, their plans and their strategies for spending. Whereas a temporary tax change, they know that it's not going to be permanent, so their spending is going to fluctuate more due to that.
Employee compensation accounts for which percentage of national income? Well, this is going to just be, a rough stat, but we would say that national income is going to be, it's going to be GDP defined not from the expenditure model, but rather GDP defined through the income model, and you can look that up on your own on how to calculate GDP based off income model. But basically wages, which would be employee compensation, is a huge part of calculating GDP through the income model, and that's why the answer is going to be 66%.
And that's just simply knowing what value it is. Now, just to make sure you guys know, if we go back up to number three, this model right here is going to be the GDP model with expenditures, consumer spending, government spending, investment, and net exports. That's the expenditure model.
Okay, moving on to the next questions. Government transfer payments act as automatic stabilizers because of labor income decreases. Transfer payments at the same time are going to increase. because what automatic stabilizers are things like welfare. And what those are is essentially when the economy enters a recession, what's going to happen is that automatic stabilizers such as welfare are going to enter the system, and they're going to notice that less people are earning income, and so welfare transfer payments like welfare are going to automatically increase.
Perfect. That's pretty simple knowledge, right? So, in response to significant economic problems, the Obama administration recommended it is going to be all of the above. So, that's looking kind of the recession of 2008. We can see that they were recommending more tax cuts. That's indirectly increasing spending on the part of producers and consumers. Increased government spending. We see that through capital injections to stabilize the economic system and to provide capital to the economy. And we also see that the substantial aid to state and local governments, which allows money to really, it's basically the federal government spending to get money into the heart of communities. So all those were used as plans to try to stimulate the national economy after the 2008 recession. And they did work.
And so this is just showing what's happening is you have aggregate demand shifting over. Aggregate supply is remaining constant, assuming that it's a very depressed or an economy in a recession. So aggregate demand is shifting over as there are more tax cuts and increased government spending, which means that there's more injections and money into the economy.
So therefore, because of that increased spending, its real GDP increases. So now we're going to number 10. So number 10 is normally to the extent that a government control mechanism succeeds in affecting the price. That's key. It can be expected to lead to a corresponding, the correct answer is going to be C. So it's going to lead to a decrease in the volume of sales whether the price is forced up or down. So Daniel, you want to explain that?
Yes, so that governments the idea that this is basically going to be the idea that any government price control, which is going to be a price ceiling or a floor, is going to overall shift the market economy and decrease volume of sales, whether the price is forced up or down, because the market is not able to correct itself appropriately for suppliers and demanders. So therefore, when the government intervenes, overall less is being sold on all parts.
Exactly. All right, so going on to number 11, a shift in the demand curve for sailboats resulting from an increase in incomes will lead to, the correct answer is going to be A, higher prices of sailboats. So we can see in the shift in demand curve, it's not just shifting the quantity demanded, but the actual curve itself, because the consumer income is increasing. And with that consumer income, the demand curve will shift to the right, because at all price levels, demand is going to increase with that increase in income. So we have that the supply curve is going to remain constant because the supply of sailboats isn't changing in this model. It's going to lead to those higher prices of sailboats because the equilibrium, the intersection between supply and demand, is shifting up as demand shifts to the right. So it's simply graphing that relationship out. You'll be able to answer questions like those.
Number 12 is a very straightforward question. It's just talking about aggregate demand. Aggregate demand actually has the same equation as GDP, and GDP is defined as consumer spending plus investments plus government spending plus net exports, and the net export component is simply going to be exports minus imports.
And that's just simple balance of trade that we've studied multiple times.
Okay. Next page. Shows the supply of steak. So you might be tempted to say that pork and steak are actually substitutional goods, but rather it's the same interaction as corn and soybeans. And so what suppliers will actually do is when there's an increase in the price of pork, more farmers will want to actually create more pork, and therefore will have less room to create steak, and therefore it's actually going to shift it down from S2 to S1, so therefore a less supply of steak.
And that's because producers are going to want to sell at a higher price. Now going on to 14. So when used in a professional or technical sense, the law of supply and demand refers to C, the market forces that show how prices and quantities are determined. That's essentially just summarizing what the law is.
A tariff affects imports by raising the price and reducing the quantity demanded, and that's just a very textbook definition.
For tariffs, which according to the definition, a tariff is a tax on imports. It's regarding trade, what a country will do to protect domestic production.
And so therefore, when you raise the price, it's going to reduce the quantity demanded, less people are willing to buy.
Okay. Now going to 17. The correct answer is going to be C.
And why is it going to be C, Arthur?
Pause it. Yeah. So if we look at the graph of supply and demand, we can see in this model that supply is not shifting. It's remaining constant. And the demand curve, we can see that the demand curve is going to shift to the left because there's going to be decreased demand with this knowledge about breast cancer. So because the supply curve doesn't shift, the movement is going to be down the supply curve due to that shift in demand.
Okay, moving on to the next set of problems. So this is going to...
Can you do the S1 and D1?
Yes.
That one? Okay. We see that if we have S1 and D1 as modeled by that, we can see that a new technology is going to further reduce the cost of producing calculators. So the entire supply curve is going to shift out to S2. However, consumers knowing this are going to cut down on their demand and wait for those developments. So demand curve is also going to shift leftward, though, because they're demanding less at all prices. So therefore, we know leftward, Daniel.
What?
So as I was saying, in this, though, we can see that demand is going to shift leftward because they're demanding less at all prices. So therefore, we know that they're using this graph that price will fall. However, because we don't know how big the shifts are in the demand and supply curve, we don't know about the predictable change in output. Therefore, it's A.
Yes.
So going on to 19.
So this is talking about comparative versus absolute advantage. And so since it's producing greater quantity of goods than another nation, not comparatively, but rather greater quantities in all aspects, all else constant, we can assume that it has an absolute advantage. And that's very much just a textbook definition.
Perfect.
Number 20, regarding consumption in the United States. So with the MPC being 0.8, so the MPC is defined as the marginal propensity to consume, and what that is basically saying is how much of a person's income they are spending on how much of a person's disposable income they are spending on consumer goods. So lower socioeconomic classes are going to spend more and are going to have therefore a higher MPC like 0.8, whereas very rich people will have spend a less proportion of their money and therefore will have a lower MPC like 0.25. And so assuming an MPC of 0.8 and the disposable income increases by $1 trillion in 2010, then the level of consumption is simply going to be 0.8 multiplied by that number plus your initial. So it's CO plus your MPC multiplied by your new disposable income.
So simple math states that 80% of $1 trillion is going to be 800 billion. So the answer is going to be B.
Okay, Arthur, do you want to explain
So
number 21?
The national income accounts for a value includes a value for the amount of capital stock used up during the production of current output. This dollar amount is called depreciation. So what's essentially happening is capital stock, when it's being used up to produce, it's being used up, so therefore it's going to depreciate. It's a very simple concept when it comes into GDP and gross national income.
Okay. Arthur, do you want to also explain number 22?
So 22, which of the following will cause an upward shift in the consumption function?
Oh, okay. So actually, I'll explain this one. This is regarding consumption versus disposable income. And so consumption always shows consumption going like this.
Yes.
And
Because
so,
as people get more income, they're going to consume more.
And so what happens is it's saying what's going to cause an upward shift in the consumption function. And so what's going to cause that upward shift in that consumption function?
It's going to be a decrease in the price level.
And so what that basically means is across the board, regardless of their income, how are they able to consume more goods? That means it's going to be a decrease in the price level.
Perfect. 22. Which of the following
23.
is the 23? Which of the following is the injection into the circular flow model? So this goes back to the idea of leakage. An injection is the opposite of a leakage. It's when money comes into a system or a national economy. So therefore, it's going to be income earned through exports because foreign money is now being brought into a domestic economy when that economy exports goods out to the foreign nations. Very simple concept.
Okay.
24.
Okay, so this is regarding quarts of ice cream being sold, and now it's saying that there's more supply sold and it's going to actually be at a higher price. So this change in quantity sold and the price may have been showing that ice cream consumption improves mental health. So that means that not only is the price going to increase, but also the supply is going to increase as there's a higher demand. And so that's all that's showing is that you've shifted the demand curve, supply and demand, that all you've done is shifted the demand curve, so now you have a higher supply, but also at a higher price level.
Perfect. So going on to 25. One reason why nations trade is because trading provides opportunities to earn profits. It goes back to the idea of comparative advantage, very simple concept that they can maximize their wealth through trade.
I doubt if number 26 is actually going to be on the test, so let's just cross it out.
Perfect. All right, 27. You were a member of Congress in 2007 to 9, so during the recession, when the economy was in recession. If your goal is to achieve full employment, you should vote for C. Increase government purchases because that will increase the government spending part of the GDP equation. Decrease taxes will indirectly increase consumer spending and investment because both producers and consumers will be able to spend more in the economy, and an increase in transfer payments, like welfare programs that would directly put money into the pockets of consumers. So all those programs under C would increase GDP under the expenditure model of GDP.
Okay.
And
to an increase in government transfer payments such as welfare is actually going to be A to E, and that's showing that we're not actually shifting up the consumption function, but rather just up the slope of the consumption function.
because consumption is not actually changing, it's not shifting, it's just moving up because disposable income is going up with government transfer payments. Government transfer payments only increase the amount of income a person has to spend in the economy, therefore it just moves up the line.
But it's not increasing consumption overall because not everybody is benefiting, because government transfer payments are redistributive policies, which means that the welfare is taken from one group and it's moved to another group, and therefore that's why it's called a transfer payment, not an increase in consumption.
Okay. So stagflation. This is a very simple definition. All stagflation is economic stagnation, low growth with high inflation. Normally, when we see high growth in an expansion, the expansion of the economy, it's going to be coupled with a high increase in prices due to the normal course of the business cycle. However, stagflation is when the economy is in a recession or even a depression, but you have inflation. And this was most seen in the 1970s, where you had both rising prices and a low economy, which severely limited the government's ability to respond to that crisis.
And this was caused by the Iranian Revolution,
as well as the energy crisis.
And the oil crisis that ensued, yes. Okay, moving on to number 30.
30. So if we go to 30, we can see a move.
Wages are probably going to be in greater in pesto land than in pasta land, and that is because wages are usually a reflection of, and this is why I think this question is a little bit flawed as well, but wages are usually a reflection of productivity, and as you can see, pesto land has an absolute advantage over pasta land because it can produce both pesto and pasta greater than pasta land.
Perfect.
Disposable income is going to be defined as the national product minus taxes plus transfers, and that's just a very basic equation. And that's sometimes they define disposable income as just GDP minus taxes, but I believe that we're also looking for transfer payments in this regard.
Perfect. All right, consumer spending represents what fraction of total spending in the economy. That's just a simple textbook definition. So we'll go on to 46, an actual conceptual question. So the correct answer to 46, why the consumption function would shift downward. So if we have the consumption function, the entire curve is actually going to shift downwards, not just shifting downwards along the curve. That's going to be because D, consumers become more pessimistic about future incomes. If consumers are more pessimistic about how much money they're going to be able to make in the future, they're going to want to save up more to prepare for a rainy day, and therefore their consumption is going to decrease at all levels of income.
Okay.
Perfect. So we go on to 47. In figure 423, which movement will be caused by changes in income?
And
that's
so
B to A.
Yeah, so this is going to be from it's going to be from B to A. All these other ones, B to D, C to A to C, these are all shifts along the curve, and that would be changes in only price level. But since it's changing in income, it's going to actually be the one that's shifting the graph, and that's only B to A. We don't know if it's increasing or decreasing, but it's the only one that actually shifts.
Perfect. Daniel, do you want to explain 48?
Yeah, so regarding an inflationary gap, the expenditure schedule so all the expenditure schedule talks about, and I can't really show it to you on a graph, but what the expenditure schedule is basically showing is how much people are willing to spend at the time. And so what the expenditure schedule really needs to do, it's not going to be the same, but the expenditure schedule can be modeled by aggregate demand. And so if we have aggregate demand moving too far out above the normal equilibrium of the economy, if we shift aggregate demand downward from and we shift it down, B, then we'll return back to our normal equilibrium.
Perfect. So the effect of an import quota is 2. The correct answer is going to be A. So an import quota would be a government limiting the amount of imports that can come into a nation. So that is obviously, if you're limiting it, it's going to reduce the quantity of the imports, and because they're more scarce, it's going to raise the price of those imports. It's going to stimulate domestic products.
Okay.
So a demand schedule. A demand schedule is going to show how much consumers are willing and able to buy at different prices. All demand schedule is a demand curve. Mm-hmm. So that's all it's saying, is that it's simply that relationship between the quantity demanded and the price of the good. So now going on to 51. Now, the Iranian Revolution in 1979 led to another interruption of oil supplies to the U.S. This caused the reoccurrence of stagflation.
And we already talked about that one.
Perfect.
Okay, moving on.
To 52.
52. Goods are distributed among the people by, and it's going to be all of these, because in a communist country such as North Korea or Cuba, it's going to be that central authority that's going to distribute goods among the people. In the United States, it's going to be markets.
And prices
that in a communist country, the central authority is going to dictate prices, so it's going to be all of these with regard to distribution of goods.
Now, which of the following would cause a movement up or leftward along the demand curve for European autos in the U.S.? So it's going to be an increase in the price of European cars. So all it's saying is that on the demand curve for European autos, it's saying that the curve is not shifting, it's just along the curve, so therefore that shift would have to be due to an increase in price. Going on to 54, economics is a social science rather than a hard science like physics, because D, economics is based on human behavior. Economics relies on the ability of humans to act rationally, to act according to their interest in money. So therefore, it is a human behavior affected by an unpredictable and vast range of influences in a society.
Protection, which is what we've talked about before with regard to the infant industry argument, is firms that are relatively inefficient, that do not permit successful competition with imports, and that's something that we talked about. You can go back on the video for that.
56. So the aggregate demand curve
moves to the right less rapidly than aggregate supply curve. So if we say that just aggregate demand shifts, or if aggregate demand just shifts right there, and it's going to move less rapidly than aggregate supply. So if we say aggregate supply moves all the way out here,
the price level should decline over time.
Price level should decline over time. Exactly. We can't say anything else about what's going to happen with regard to real GDP because we don't know how much they're shifting, so that's all we can speculate as to.
Perfect. Now, 57. In March 2015, many college students bet on the NCAA finals and dorm gambling pools. I bet some of you did as well. This is an example of underground economic activity. It's not occurring in a market or anything. It is an underground activity that's happening outside of markets for goods and services.
And so this would be called something known as a black market, and it's not factored into our GDP equation, and therefore it's not going to be nominal or real GDP. It's going to be underground.
Another underground economic activity would be giving Mabes Diet Cokes. That is an underground economic activity.
Absolutely.
58. What is the basic task that economists expect the market to carry out? It would be D. Deal with the fundamental problem of scarcity.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, it's going to be A. Dealing with the fundamental problem of scarcity.
So it's going to say the market is going to naturally, the capitalistic market is going to naturally dictate what goods and prices are, what the price of goods are going to be and the quantity of those goods supplied and demanded, because goods are scarce, not unlimited goods.
An individual's demand schedule is going to be providing information about the quantity a consumer is willing and able to buy at each price. It's not going to be a schedule that regulates monthly sales, and it's not going to be a supply schedule. It's just going to be
just the demand curve.
It's just the demand curve overall.
Perfect. The Trade Adjustment Assistance Program is intended to help.
And this is going to be regarding workers and businesses that lose markets because of increases in imports. And this is going to be, once again, the protective theory. And this was created in the 1960s by JFK. And this is just because of overall imports and
manufacturing leaving the country.
And manufacturing leaving the country.
Perfect.
And so that's why the answer is going to be D.
Perfect. 61. If price rises, what happens to demand for a product? This is a very simple question. The law of demand. It's going to be, it does not change.
And the reason why it's not going to change is because it's asking for what happens to the demand for a product, not what changes, not if the quantity demanded, which is going to be price, which is going to be a price change, but rather does the demand curve shift. And since price rises, it's not going to actually change the demand shift.
So that's a very important distinction that you will have to make. That if it asks about demand, it's referring to the curve. The curve does not shift if price rises. Simply the quantity demanded along the curve shifts.
Textbook definition. Let's move on.
Perfect. 63. If a macroeconomist aggregates many markets into one, then individual market differences are eliminated. This is what macroeconomics does. It takes all the markets in the United States and adds them together into one to define a national economy.
Scarcity is it applies to all the following except human wants. Economic theory assumes that human wants are unlimited.
We're always wanting more than what we have.
Tariffs are different from quotas because they increase government revenue. So quotas are basically saying that country X, or let's say China in this instance, can only import a certain amount of toys, but rather tariff says you can import as many toys as you want, but you have to pay taxes. And so that's why tariffs are going to increase government revenue, but they're both going to place the burden on foreigners. Okay?
Perfect. 66. The United States produces both automobiles and computers more efficiently than Mexico. That's an absolute advantage. Nevertheless, it is possible that both nations would benefit from trade in these items, and this is because of comparative advantage. We don't have to go into this. We've spent days in class doing this.
Okay.
67. The economy in the period 1950 to 1998 behaved differently than the economy in the 1870 to 1940 time period. Economists explain this difference because...
This is because of stabilization policy, and this is why, because during the 1950s to the pretty much 2000, the United States really espoused this idea of Keynesian economics, which stabilized the market and made sure that we didn't have these violent changes within the business cycle that we saw in the 1870s to the 1940s. So that's why it would be stabilization policy. You can also talk about the Great Moderation, which shows that changes in GDP don't change as rapidly during this time period.
Perfect. Now, 68 is a textbook definition. Opportunity cost is D, the value of the best alternative when the alternative in hand is chosen. Now going into 69, which of the following is one source of disagreement between economists? Economists are going to disagree, in fact, over everything. They're going to disagree about some facts in the economy are unknown. That could be classical versus Keynesian economics. They're going to differ in political persuasions when they take politics into account in their economics, and they're going to differ on C and D too. That solving one problem may make another problem worse. Keynesian theory solving aggregate demand may lead to a worsening in inflation, or economic theory might not always give an unambiguous answer to a question. All of these are ways that they differ.
Opportunity cost value of what must be given up, textbook definition. International repercussion of either financial expansion or monetary contraction. Both of these are going to raise interest rates. So that means we can eliminate C and D, because monetary contraction is going to raise interest rates, and so is fiscal expansion, because now you're increasing aggregate demand. And when you raise interest rates, you're actually also going to be raising the exchange rate, and thereby you're crowding out net exports, because when you raise the exchange rate, you're making exports less incentivized you're making exports less likely to be sold on the international market, because now foreigners are having to pay more for U.S. products, so thereby you're crowding out net exports.
Perfect. Now 72, a currency appreciation should. The correct answer is going to be C. Because when the currency in the economy increases, like for example, the United States dollar in the late 20th century, the value of the dollar increased relative to all other countries. That's going to lead to it being cheaper to produce goods in other countries relative to the United States. Therefore, currency appreciation will reduce the exports that a country is going to be able to do, because people are going to want to produce in other countries, and therefore it's going to decrease aggregate demand, because aggregate demand is based off of net exports. That's a part of the equation. We can see this on the flip side when China tries to devalue its currency, as they've done a lot of times. That allows their exports to become more profitable and more encouraged.
Okay, moving on. A country with an undervalued currency, which is what we just talked about before, will accumulate reserves of foreign currency. So just like we talked about, when China undervalues its currency, what we can say is that it will accumulate reserves of foreign currencies, because now they're exporting more, and since they're exporting more, now the U.S. dollar is being traded back into China, and so they will accumulate reserves
because
of foreign
we're
currency.
paying for their exports. 74. National debt is likely to fall when B. Government expenditures fall short of its receipt. It means the government is bringing in more money than it spends. As a surplus, then debt falls.
And the shortfall between actual real GDP and potential GDP. So this is saying it's the shortfall between when we are either in an inflationary gap, and so our potential GDP, which might be this long-run aggregate supply right over here, and our actual GDP, which is this equilibrium right here, will it's asking about the shortfall between these distances, and the correct answer is going to be B. Increases as the unemployment rate rises.
Because as the unemployment rate rises, less people are working, and therefore what they could have produced had they been employed in labor is not being produced. Therefore, the shortfall increases between what the economy could be producing and what it's actually producing.
So if unemployment rate rises, aggregate demand shifts over, and therefore that delta increases. So
Perfect.
Thank you guys for coming in. Arthur, anything else?
Hope you guys good luck on the test. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post in the Facebook group. We'll try to get to those, and we hope that this helps you guys understand a little bit more about micro and macroeconomics.
Okay, thank you.
Keynes Chill.
Okay, thank you guys. Have a good night.